First of all, thank you very much for your presentation, Darren, at the Performance Multidisciplinary Team webinar. It was really appreciated and it got a lot of good feedback, so thank you very much, first of all. Would you mind providing the listeners, for those who weren't able to tune in at the time, just a brief summary of what your presentation was about, please?
Sure. Thanks for having me again, Steve. I just want to say I'm practicing social isolation, as you can see in the background, on a nice quiet beach here in Oz, where we're keeping our distance. But no, the background was of the webinar was talking mainly about injury prevention and how we can use monitoring to hopefully give us more information on how to prevent injuries and improve performance. So it was a little bit of a run through some of the main monitoring techniques and practices that I've used in the past and that are sort of reasonably commonly used, and just the positives and negatives of each and how they might or might not be used in elite team sport, I guess.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. Rob, over to you for the first question.
Absolutely. So thanks for getting me involved, Steve. The first question that came in afterwards, Darren, was what is the next big innovation, either method or technology, which will be used in professional soccer?
I would think virtual reality has got a place in training. We sort of dabbled in it in my last few months at Arsenal, where you could really immerse players. You could go and take the camera out to training and film different drills and scenarios, particularly with goalkeepers, as you can imagine. So I would think that has a really big place in teaching players where to look, and also to study elite players on where they do look and what processing goes on before they make decisions, particularly with injured players and junior players, and even with talent ID. If we could get some really sort of high-class virtual reality and as lifelike as possible, because they've been pretty much stick figures up until now. But yeah, I would think that's got a fair way. That's got some traction, I think, in elite environments for sure. Because in situations like this that we're under at the moment, you can just imagine you can send players out various drills and scenarios and have them work through that.
Nice.
Thank you, Darren, and I'll thank you on behalf of my PhD student, because he'll be absolutely buzzing to hear you say that.
No problem.
So the next question that came in was from Tom Ryan. So for monitoring training loads, do you think it is worth using a multi-mechanical modelling method, bit of a mouthful, or do you think this is an oversimplification?
It depends what you mean by multi-mechanical modelling method. I think one of the issues that is coming up and has been around for a few years in monitoring is that we've jumped on things like accelerometry to assume mechanical load based on some accelerometer data, which is not always accurate, and GPS data, which is not always as accurate as it might be. And certainly having a GPS device placed here is between your shoulder blades is not always the best depiction of what mechanical load is going through the body. There's some good work being done to develop a more accurate, more appropriately placed device, but I think it's an over complex, or you're overcomplicating a simple issue, and just assume with the information that we've got, which is pretty accurate in some of the GPS and accelerometer stuff. It's not too bad in terms of motion, but in terms of mechanical load going through the body, I think that's probably a step too far at the moment anyway with the current technology.
Nice. So we've got next one. So how would you measure GPS metrics where you have the ball versus when you don't have the ball? Like how would you differentiate these factors when you analyze your GPS data?
Yeah, I think there's two questions in that, or 2 points for that. I think it's really important to analyze physical output when your team has the ball. So when you're in possession and when you're out of possession, I think that can really assist you in profiling both individuals and teams. I'll give you an example. With one of the teams that I've worked for, we looked at sprint meters per minute when we were both in possession and out of possession. And we found when we won, our sprint meters when we were out of possession were a lot less. And our distance out of possession was actually more, but our sprint out of possession was actually less. And our time in possession was the same. For all the statisticians out there saying, did we cater for that? We did. And that was simply, speaking to coaches and trying to have a look at ourselves, we're pretty confident that was because tactically we were in formation a lot easier, so we didn't have to do a lot of work when we're out of possession. So we're nice and compact, and that hopefully affected the result. So also at an individual level, you can see players who are more eager to run with the ball or when the team has the ball than when the team doesn't. So we all know those players. And sometimes we really want those players in your team. At other times you don't. So yes, we absolutely look at GPS metrics with and without possession from a team and individual point of view. From a load point of view, I think it's probably a bit much. I mean, the players in possession for just over 2 minutes a game on average. So there's probably not much point in looking at an individual player when he or she has the ball, but certainly when teams have the ball, I think that's really important.
Thanks, Darren. So the next one's in relation to the coaching staff that you worked with in the 18-19 season. So question was, how did you overcome the fact that they didn't speak much English, and did it affect your ability to service the athletes as a consequence?
No, the athletes were the same. Their language was the same, so they weren't sort of influenced by the coach's language. But I've certainly worked with athletes. We signed a guy called Lucas Torreira, who hardly spoke any English when he joined Arsenal, but he was an incredible professional, so it was never a problem. And he learnt English, so it became easier and easier. Overcoming the staff not speaking a lot of English was tough. I started learning Spanish to attempt to communicate reasonably well. That didn't go all that well. When within the coaching staff, there were 6, I think, that were brought in. And certainly 2 of them spoke pretty good English, so they acted as translators. Unfortunately, at a club like Arsenal, you could have, I had pretty much a full-time translator, so if there was any issues, I could go to the translator, certainly initially. I must say, not that anybody, any sort of media would be listening to this, but they all worked, and in particular, the manager worked incredibly hard daily, spending at least an hour or 2 a day on learning English and learning, in particular, football English. So they worked incredibly hard on their English to try and immerse themselves into our culture. But does it make it more difficult? Absolutely. Probably the most frustrating part for both the coaches and the players was on the pitch, because they're trying to explain concepts and it didn't, not in their first language. So often drills had to be stopped while explanations were going on, which disrupt the flow for everybody.
No,
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Darren.
So next one coming up was about your training loads between loads between training and matches. So Darren spoke of there was no relationship between training and match loads. What about the type of training? For example, do more sprint training during the week leading to games as compared to aerobic work?
Yeah, it's everything is a case by case and a team by team scenario. We certainly found that if we did a high volume of sprints on either match day -2 or match day -1, we felt the team was compromised a little bit, and sometimes that's in our control and sometimes it isn't, due to the drills and enthusiasm of the players and whatever it might be. Although the training load didn't necessarily differentiate between good and bad performances in the 7 days leading up to games, we felt that if that training load consisted of a really high volume of sprinting, that the team or those individuals who did that high volume were at a greater risk of injury or poor performance. So I think it's important to keep both in mind for sure.
Cool.
Thank you very much, Darren, and thanks to everyone for their questions from the Performance NDT. And again, appreciate your time, Darren and Rob, for coming on to answer some of those questions. And yeah, tune in too.